been talking to them about various issues. They were in the lodge in the decade before me. And then Al Hogavine's Arapaho 2 has a lot of nice information. And I think Jeff will probably recognize some of the how the patches are compared, because I also looked at the green book that Jeff and Alan O'Connor put together. So Ashie Lodge is from San Diego County Council. It was first organized. They started thinking about getting a lodge in 1949 and in 1950. And it lasted until San Diego County Council and Desert Trails Council, which was Pang Lodge, merged in 1992. I think the date would have been January 1, 1993. So the lodge totem is a thunderbird. And the lodge also had a symbol, which was a Navajo sand painting. At its peak for recharter, the lodge had 1,951 members in 1959. The lodge advisor at the time was Maury Clancy, who was the lodge advisor for 9 years. So when he first became the lodge advisor in 1962, there were about 400 members. And when he left, there were close to 2,000. For those of you who know about the Indian Campership Fund, that's named after Maury. He was a member of the management committee. He ended up moving to New Mexico and DSA recipient. So in the 60s and carried over into the 70s, the lodge itself had had a very active American Indian activities group. So lots of dancing and ceremony team. There are about, I don't know, 10 districts out in the council, and each district had its own clan, as they were called then. We call them chapters now. The first patch that the lodge issued was the X1. It was, there was no patch for WAB, but the designer left in 1953. He moved up to the LA area. So it was probably issued in 52 or 53. The first flap was the S1, probably issued in the late 50s. We don't have an exact date. And there was no restriction on the flaps, but you had to work 8 hours at a lodge service project at a council camp. And you were the clan secretary's best friend, because if he didn't write it down and you didn't have 8 hours, you didn't get a patch. And they're pretty diligent about making sure 8 hours of service was required. The sand painting was based on a weaving by Hosting Cobb. He was a Navajo medicine man and weaver. He was very important to preserving in the early 1900s. He started weaving the sand painting into huge rugs or tapestries, which means they were permanent, which was controversial within the tribe. He allowed the hail chant, which is what this patch or design is based on, to be recorded and transcribed. He died in 1937, and with him, the hail chant died because the hail chant lasted at least 5 days, and he did an understudy in 1919, and he just couldn't bring himself to get another apprentice. If you want to know the story of what all the colors and stuff mean, it is in the WAB. It's also in Arapaho, and there are other sources where you can find what it is. But the patch itself was designed by first lodge advisor George, and he moved up to LA area in 1953. So the first 7 patches, the S1 through the S7, take us to about 1970. And this is where a lot of the confusion of what patch is what comes in. So the first flap is the S1. It's the only cut edge flap that the Lodge issued. All right, so the way to tell the difference between the two flaps is this picture doesn't show it well, but the S1A has a gray base material and the S1B has an orange material. The S1A is the much harder patch to find, and it's the one that in Blue Book is identified as the first flap. So next we get to the S2, which is about the same size as the S1, but it's got a rolled edge. The way to distinguish these is it's these two blue lines. In the S2A, they're in the upper half of the black rays. In the S2B, it's in the lower half. There's also a yellow thread here. If you look at enough of these, you'll find them in the center. So I don't know if that's another variety or not, but this one is neither an S2A or an S2B. The S3 probably came out in 1962. And here, the way you distinguish the S3 and the S4 is the E in Ashie and the 4 from 436 are essentially right justified. So the S3 has a pale blue border or a light blue border, and the S4 has a pale blue border. And then there are lock stitch variations, either blue or white. And for the S4, only one is listed in Blue Book, but again, you can find either a blue or a white lock stitch variation. For the S3B is with the white lock stitch is of the 3 Blue Book issues, the harder one to find. I haven't actually looked at enough S4s to know if these are distributed evenly or not. So the S5, which is probably the most common of the flaps, is here. The way to identify this is the 4 is in between the E and the L, whereas in the S3, it's right justified. And there are 4 versions of this flap. It's got either a rolled edge or a flat rolled edge in blue or white lock stitch. And all four varieties are on eBay now for $5 each. So it is a real common flap. And these would have come out when the lodge had more than 1,000 members. And my lodge traditionally buys enough for every member to have the same flap. The S6 and the S7 are distinctive in that the background color is bronze. The S6 has vertical stitching and the S7 has a horizontal stitching. And then there are lock stitch variations of these two, white or blue for the S6 or blue, tan, or white for the S7. The tan lock stitch version of the S7 is the harder one to find. Then in 1971, a new flap was issued. From what I've been told, it did not go over well with some of the more seasoned members of the lodge because it was a radical departure. So these are generally fairly easy to distinguish. The S8 has the 4 concho belt, and the Ashie is at the same level as the clouds. There are 3 lock stitch variations. One's got a blue lock stitch with a rolled edge, and then there's blue lock stitch or a nylon lock stitch with the flat rolled edge. The S9 is the easiest of the sand painters to distinguish because the Ashie's below the cloud. The S12 has 5 concho belts, and there are no variations. And then in later, they removed the 2 pots and put a drum with a fleur-de-lis on it when that was required. This is or was referred to as the Brotherhood flap, although the S12 is the flap I received when I was an ordeal member when I was inducted in 1971. Then the S10 and the S11 have, this picture doesn't do it justice. The background of the patch is khaki, and there's a pale blue versus light blue borders. There are a lot of these available. In 1975, the Lodge celebrated its 25th year. This patch was given to those who went to the banquet, including guests, and the banquets were called the Mother, Father, Son banquet. There were 471 at the banquet, so I'm sure there were at least 300 of the patches were made. Then the fleur-de-lis was added to the patch. The first, the 16 and 17 had computer design. The 17 has an orange background that doesn't really show up here. And from this point on, most of the flaps are easy to distinguish what number they are. So in the mid-80s, this black flap came out. If you collect the backs, you can get a white one or a brown or black one. This one wasn't necessarily well received either, but it was much better than the S24, which this bustle design that nobody liked. The S24 is the only patch that has neither a Thunderbird nor the sand painting on it. This one lasted until they were sold out. The last regular issue was in 1992. This smaller flap here, right here, there's a TR, which was, this patch was a memorial flap for Terry Reed, who passed away, was real active in the Lodge. Ashie Lodge had two region chiefs. 1989, it was Mike Southall. 1991 was Louis Monville. And the Lodge made flaps for both of them. The S23, there were 500 of these made. The S29, there must have been 1,000 made because it's pretty common. We had some anniversary flaps, more anniversary flaps. In 1985 was a 35th anniversary. There was a trading post patch. And again, if you went to the banquet, you had the right to purchase a flap. I think they ordered 150 flaps. 127 airmen attended the banquet. So at the next LEC, they cut them up and burned them in the fireplace at the Scout headquarters. In 1989 was the council's 75th anniversary. The first order had 2 red bars, so they reordered it with the blue and the red bars. And if you look at the S25, there are 2 distinct blue variations, and there are a lot of this duller blue variation. So I think there was just one machine had a different colored thread in it, but that's another one that's not in Blue Book. When in 1996, the Lodge started issuing NOAC flaps. Of these, the 86 NOAC flap was the best one. There were 100 of these made. At the 75th anniversary in 1990, there was a delegate flap and a trader flap, but all these were pretty common and not that hard to get. Since we're on NOAC, there was a CSP or an SAP issued for each of the 4 NOACs that the Lodge issued patches for. The 86 NOAC SAP is actually harder to find than the flap, but there were 100 of them made, so I'm not quite sure why. In 88, there are 2 versions of the SAP. The easiest way to look at them, if you don't have them next to each other, to be able to discriminate on this brownish cover, is the X9 has a brown lock stitch and the X8 has a orange lock stitch. Then in 1990, there was also a delegate patch made. There were 60 of the R8s, and the NOAC committee, which was 3 youth and 3 adult, designed one that had a silver mylar lettering. And without a doubt, the R9 is the toughest issue in the lodge because there are only 6 of them, and most of the people who got them are patch collectors. The lodge merged in 1992. So both lodges together issued a joint flap. I don't know what numbers the Pang Lodge issue is. There were 450 of the red bordered ones made and 50 of the yellow bordered ones. I know that Harry Bach, and the lodge chief of Ashie, he just gave them out to people who were contributed to the lodge during that period. Jason Jackson was the Pang Lodge chief. I'm not sure how he distributed his 10 patches. 1996, this is the only twill patch that the lodge issued for a flap. Again, if you went to the lodge banquet, you could get one. There's the red, white, and blue version. If the spool is put on the other direction, you have red, blue, and white, or you can say clockwise, it's red, white, and blue, or counterclockwise, red, white, and blue. 1992, the lodge issued a beaded flap. All 20 of the flaps are exactly the same. The contingent member had to pay $25 that went to the contingent fund. Ashie Lodge tended to pay the entire fee for the youth, so it was a fundraising thing. Every one of these has a backing on it that's hot glued on that Claude Frainer, who made the patches. This one was sold at a fundraiser. Rick Rolfe went to the NOAC, so his says made for Rick Rolfe, and it has a number on it. So there are 20 of these, and there are a couple that are probably still available if you know the right people to talk to. In 1984, 85, the lodge started issuing vigil flaps. An airman, Dale Kincaid, who was lodge advisor at one point, would just collect money until there was a sufficient number and they would be ordered from standard pennant. The C1 is, if you read the description, this to the left of the sand painter, this is considered 1 pot. This is 2 pots. Here we're back to 1 pot, and this is 2 pots. So the 1 pot, 2 pot is the way that you can tell the C1 and C2 apart. And for the C2, 3, and 4, the easiest way is to look at the back. It either has a canvas back, a Pellon back, or it's red. And the issue order, because all these are named and numbered, the issue order is actually C1, C2, C4, and C3. What else do we have? Oh, octagons. So the octagon is the first patch that was issued by the lodge. X1 through X4 are cut edge. X5 and X6 have are rolled edges. X1 and X5 through X5 are found on neckerchiefs. The X6 was sort of a back patch. It's too big for a neckerchief, but sort of too small to be a good back patch. So the early octagons, the way to tell them apart is by the arrowhead. The X1 has 2 thread directions, the X2 has 1 thread direction, and the X3 has an outline. You can also look here, this is a 12 millimeter breadth for the strands. This is 17 millimeters. This is 17 millimeters as well, but the strands tend to get absorbed into the background. For the X5, it's simply there's a rolled edge versus a flat rolled edge. Most of the X5s you find, or X5Bs, are stitched. And then for the X6, the way you discriminate between the two is these bars at the bottom. This one is considered the fuzzy bar versus the distinct bar. In 1971, they introduced the pie patch. There are 3 versions of it and then a prototype. The prototype's twill. And these were, although they're meant for neckerchief wear, the Lodge never sold them sewed onto a neckerchief. And the way to tell these apart has to do with the concho belts. The P1A has 4 that are completely yellow, or well, dark yellow. The P1B, it's blue and yellow in the concho belt, and the P1C is a yellow versus dark yellow. And all of the P1Cs have this outline sort of shading, or the outline of the arm is above the rest of the embroidery. The J1 is 12 inches across and it's huge. It's Asian embroidery. The back is canvas. It was made in 1963, and the story I heard from someone who was at the 12E conclave and the 12A conclave in 1963. They were on the same day. So they were, he was at the 12E first, then he drove down and went to the 12A. The guy who ordered these ordered 100 of them, but only received 84. So it's sort of unknown exactly how many of these were made, but 84, I think, is a good number. And there are 2 versions of these. The lower bar set, there are some with yellow. This is actually a raised yellow bar here versus a white bar. And the one with the white is a lot harder to find. But it's a nice huge backpack that doesn't fit into any convenient envelope. The Lodge also issued a couple more jacket patches. The J2, there were 400 of these made, and they came out in the mid 80s, and you could order a nylon jacket to sew it right on the silk screen on the back. And then the J3 probably had another 400. For the Lodge never issued patches for, like now, for ceremony teams or anything. They always had rounds for awards. So we had the camp promotion team, which generally meant you had to call up a scoutmaster and arrange a camp promotion visit at the unit. There are 2 of this first version, which came out in 1963. The first one has a flat rolled edge and bright green trees, whereas the R2 has a regular rolled edge and dark green trees, and the trees here are stitched vertically. Then the R3, which came out probably in the late 60s, there are 2 versions. The greens, one of them's green versus light green. I can't tell those apart, but the yellow, the dark yellow versus the yellow is easy to tell these apart. This design is still used by Tiwahe Lodge, so we're on to over 40 years of this design. And on the canoes here, there's the brand for Mattaway Scout Camp or Wacakush. The Dancer Award was 1 per life. In the 80s, they changed this to allow adults to earn the dancer award. And so this is of the rounds in some of the ways the toughest with how many earn the award, but there are a lot of these out there. The ceremonial award, which you had to earn the ceremony award, you actually had to go with the team to demonstrate proficiency in front of a panel. And you had to be certified to perform a team. The difference between the 5 and the 6 is the addition of the fleur-de-lis. Then in the mid-'80s, they added a lodge election team patch. The final lodge awards are the Alangamat Award, which you get one per year, and it took at least a year to get the award because one of your Alangamat clan had to make brotherhood. This patch was first authorized in 1989, which means the first one were given out in 1990. 2 were given out in 1990, 2 were given out in 1991, maybe 5 or 6 in 1992, which would mean 10 were awarded, but the lodge ceased to exist and the rest of them got out in population. So it's still a tough piece to get, but it's not that common. And then the Woolamone Award, which is essentially a participation award. You had to go to, if you throw in a chapter ordeal, you had to go to 3 of the 4 events your chapter participated in and go to 75% of the chapter meetings. This was only issued for 2 years. And so there were about 60 of these earned. And this is a fairly difficult one to find. Blue Book lists this armband, sort of self-evident that it's a camp promotion team and it's for 1991, but I'm not certain why it was issued. So instead of showing all of the lodge event patches, the ones that are somewhat harder to get are the first event patch the lodge issued was in 1958, the Fall Fellowship. And generally the lodge had a spring event, which was either called a fellowship or Paul Bunyan Days. It had a fall event, which was called the Fall Fellowship, and a lodge banquet. And the lodge didn't issue that many banquet patches. Looking on eBay, I guess I shouldn't have put the 61 patches here because they're pretty easy to find. The hardest on this page is this 1960 Spring Fellowship. The 60 Fall Fellowship's pretty hard to find as well. This red bordered 62 is easy to find, but there is a black bordered issue. There's one known, and I suspect it was probably a prototype. And then the 63, 76, and 82 Fall Fellowships, for whatever reason, are a little bit harder to find. The spring event, the Paul Bunyan Days, there were 2 versions of the 74. And the way you tell these apart is this Ashie 436. This is considered thick letters here versus thin letters. This patch on the right here is a bit of a sleeper patch because it doesn't say Ashie Lodge, but this was the or it doesn't have a year either. This is the 1975 Paul Bunyan Days the lodge held. And this one isn't that common, and you have to know what you're looking for. 76 and 84 were another 2 issues that were not that easy to find. For lodge neckerchiefs, they actually only issued one that's classified as a neckerchief. That's this N1, which was probably issued in 1989. It's a silk screen. This is actually fairly hard to find. We had some event neckerchiefs. The 1970 neckerchief, 447 people attended this Fall Fellowship. So this is actually an easy one to get, but there's a pale blue versus a blue field. They're both pretty easy to get. So these two neckerchiefs, which were at the Fall Fellowship in 70 or 71, nobody knows how many were made. Nobody knows why they were made. I talked to the 1971 Lodge secretary. He had no idea a neckerchief was made for the event. So these are exceedingly hard to find, but no one knows why they're made. In 1970, there was also this 2-inch by 3-inch felt that has this same silk screen on it. My speculation is somebody got into silk screening and just made lots of stuff. So clan issues, which are the harder event patches to find. This is the first half of them. This Silver Strand District Tappery is actually Neshola clan. This one is a pretty hard patch to find. This 1976 Weeblo Re, this was Kahanani clan. It's essentially a district patch that put the 3 W's on. I think a lot of people from Ashie never considered this a lodge issue. The OA helped work the events, but they didn't really have anything to do with the planning of it. Haudosleto, which is in East County, San Diego, issued this 1975 dome-shaped patch. Of all the chapter patches or clan patches, this is without a doubt the hardest to find. A lot of people, this was my last chapter issue I needed. Also, this 1967 Kashini work project patch is also a fairly hard one to find. There were some active dancers. The Amangi Indian dancers for Ye clan is a fairly hard one to find. This is the Hurl Kakush patch instead of H-U-A-R or H-U-A-L, it's H-U-R-L. And then in 1965, Kahanani clan issued this leather neckerchief slide. It's not a patch, but it's listed in Blue Book, and this is actually the hardest clan issue in my estimation. So that's pretty much what's in Blue Book, but the lodge issued a lot of other stuff. Neckerchiefs in Southern California, a lot of the lodges had red and white neckerchiefs, and the X1 through X4 can be found on sateen neckerchiefs. A lot of the white has quite a bit of red bled into it now on a lot of these neckerchiefs. This is an X1, 2, 3, and 4. The X1 is the only issue that's on this different sort of geometry of red and white. And the X5 was issued on cotton neckerchiefs, and they're ubiquitous. The pie patch was made for neckerchiefs, and the lodge helpfully told you how to make your own, and they sold you a kit. I like this part on patches here. The pocket patches are 50 cents and 8 hours of arduous toil. The only price for the neckerchief patch is 65 cents. So if you didn't want to do 8 hours of work, you just buy a pie patch. So this particular neckerchief here would have been, according to the instructions, neckerchief for a vigil honor. Of course, we had coffee cups. This one would have been 71 for anniversary in 75 and 76. The 1979 and 1980 neckerchiefs or mugs were actually the event patch. So they didn't issue patches in 79 or 80, you got a mug. And for whatever reason in 1980, there were 2 different styles. And then they issued just a generic Ashie flap or the 35th anniversary mug. Vigil call-out tokens. A lot of them are just pieces of sheet metal that have been painted red, and they have sharp edges. This one is wood with a little wooden arrows put on it. You can see the arrows came off this. I received my Vigil Honor in '87. I actually got a patch that has a piece of balsa wood glued onto the back to give it a certain amount of stiffness. For officers, both clan and lodge officers, they gave medals out. This design here is what's on the camp promotion patch. So I suspect that the design of the medal determined what the camp promotion patch was. If you were in a clan position, you got silver. If you were in a lodge position, you got gold. These are 1 3/4 inches in 1985, they switched these to 2.5 inch versus 1 3/4 inch. If you were a lodge advisor, a lodge chief, you got a red, white, and blue ribbon. The lodge has an award the lodge can present up to 3 awards for supporting camping. So the first awards of these were mostly given to like the camping secretary. You didn't have to be an airman to get it. Originally, they were issued on this starburst pattern. For those of you who recognize it, this is a yeoman's rating, which is conveniently cross feathers. So in 1994, they switched from the starburst to this standard metal with a yeoman's quills glued onto it. The founder's pin, so the Founders Award was authorized in 1982. Between 1982 and 1992, the Lodge awarded 17 Founders Awards. The 1992 recipients didn't get this pin, and this pin is sterling silver. Al DeWeese was the one who had them made. The silversmith went out of business, and the two in '92 never got one. But these were meant to be pinned onto your flap, and it covered the corn pollen boy face that's of the sand painting. So these are hard to come by. And if you didn't know it was a lodge issue, you wouldn't recognize it. We had plenty of neckerchief slides. The cloisonne neckerchief slides, there were actually 3 versions of it. This first one, which is curved and is a much more delicate slide. The second one, there must have been 2 orders because on the back, they're quite different. In the 60s, probably this resin arrowhead came out with Ashie on it. In the late 60s, there were these plexiglass slides. If you're a Ordeal Brotherhood or Vigil Honor member, you can buy one. And then apparently lots of people made their own slides. These were probably, well, this is obviously 1968, and this one probably is as well. Late 80s, we had pins. So the majority of these pins are either anniversary pins or some NOAC pins, but this is all of them. So there were 9 in the lodge. A few other oddball items that existed. Quasini chapter, they had a few of these hand-painted dancer neckerchiefs. They also had their own belt buckle made. For the Paul Bunyan days in 1994, there's also this resin bolo tie that's hand-painted. And I don't know what the deal was in 1971, but they made a bolo tie, a clip, a key ring, a neckerchief slide, a money clip, and a name badge. If you're into varieties, there either on the left or the right in the original box, but they're these name tags, there are tons of them, and they're pretty easy to find. So going back to the wob, this is in the wob, and this chain leads to speculation that maybe this was a Caldwell pin. So I conveniently copied these 4 pins from Bill Topkis's website. Rick remembers at least one of these pins being sold at our scout shop. So this is a pin that was presumably originally designed for Waggion Lodge 6. So this was the Caldwell pin that Ashie Lodge members would have bought, and no one has ever seen a pin associated with the drawing that's in WOB. Other things that I'm not showing that I also collect, Where to Go camping guides. They first started coming out in 1964. There are all sorts of plaques available for either lodge events or chapter recognition. Lots of screen printed ribbons. The Ashie newsletter started in 1959. So I need the first 10 years pretty much. A lot of programs for events. I have membership cards for Ashie dating back to 1952. I like pictures. Essentially anything that says Ashie Lodge on it, I collect. And I'll leave you with a couple of items I managed to pick up. The actual lodge charters. So the earliest one I have is from 1957. I actually like this one from the golden anniversary year 1965, which is a nice piece. So that's my Ashie Lodge talk.